This podcast was always supposed to be between me and Paul. But instead, what you're getting is just me and my dog. I've been planning it for over a year to try and get Paul to agree to do a podcast with me. But despite my best efforts, it just hasn't happened for many reasons. And I can keep using it as an excuse to not do one and to just forget about everything. But that's just a cop-out, isn't it? So, really all we're left with is the situation of whether or not anyone is interested in listening to what I have to say.
So let's get started. For anyone who follows me on social media, you'll know that I've been camping for the last week or so, about 8 days. And I found this tucked away little place where I could set up my tent and be shut off from literally the whole world. My time in solitude allowed me to consider what I could possibly do to move forward with this idea of a podcast. And so as I sat reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, which we can talk about at another time, all I did was consider where I was going and what I'd been doing. It might look like I know what I'm talking about when it comes to the great outdoors. I'm very comfortable there. But this little video that I'm showing you now is what it's really like to be me in the bush, in the wilderness. I wanted to give you a bit of an insight to who I am as a person. I don't know if you can see it because it's so well camouflaged, but there is a massive spider on the ground. And right now I'm trying to work out, is it real? Not so much is it real, because I know it's real, but is it alive? And this is the process that I go through in order to identify threats in my life. I'm a fan of most critters, and I don't have a great fear of them. But I don't like spiders, particularly the big huntsmans that we get in Australia. So I needed to know for sure, but there was no way I was going to actually touch it. So here I am working out how to move forward with my big stick. So I'm going to just give it a big push and see whether it jumps, and it doesn't. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, so it's dead. So you would think that that would be okay, right? That everything would be all right, because I'm like, oh yeah, it's not moving, so it must be dead. But I know how these things work. Usually with huntsmen, if there's one, there are two. So I'm constantly looking around to see whether or not there's another threat. Once I decided that there weren't any other huntsmen that I could see, not that you can see them easily because you can't, I then decided that I didn't want it near my tent. And so I spend the next few minutes just, trying to get rid of it. My life is a bit like my camera work, messy and confusing, and has the tendency to make some people feel a bit ill. I've thought of many different ways to do this podcast, and shoddy camera work like this wasn't, part of any viable option that I considered. But in the absence of constantly having a camera at the end of a selfie stick, this is kind of what you get. And when I'm not out and about, it's a different story. But for the purposes of this little introduction to my podcast, I hope you bear with me. So for the remainder of the time that we are chatting today, I'm just going to swap between talking about the podcast and
describing what I'm showing on the video for those who are only listening to the audio.
The place where I went camping and the place where I feel most able to be myself is around water, and particularly around fresh water. Every time I go camping, I will go somewhere where I can access a creek or a river like this. There's something just deeply profound and important to me for some reason about being near water, and I don't really want to live anywhere else. This is where I want to spend my time, and it's where I've been spending my time for about the last year, since I lost my job, say, as an indicator of a potential change in life trajectory. For about a year now, I haven't been working, and I have been spending my entire time self-analyzing in an attempt to better understand life, but most importantly to better understand myself. And through that process, I think I've come across some really, really important learnings that other people may or may not find helpful. But in the absence of having any other plan to move my life in the direction that I want it to go, which is to spend more time doing what I'm doing right now and less time worrying about how I'm going to pay to put shoes on my hobbit feet. This is the decision that I've made. I listened to Dave Rubin and Brett Weinstein talk about this existential dilemma that people face in their workplaces, and I hit it, and I've been hitting it for about a decade, if I'm honest, and it just has changed my life in an irredeemable way, to the point where I can't go back. I can't go back to being a part of a full-time work, willing slave, job that I hate scenario, sitting in front of a computer all day. It's just not going to happen for me. I value my life too much, and I value my experiences too much to waste another single moment in the pursuit of wealth for another person or a corporation. If I don't have the ability to find a way for myself to prosper outside of the system, then I'm prepared to adapt. If it means that I spend my life camping because I can't afford rent, then so be it. I choose that over the alternative. So while I was camping, every day I'm down here at the river. My dog Zara, she loves it as well. The water is just so clear. It wasn't until about the third day that I had a look on Google to see whether or not there were any potential nasties in the water. For those of you who don't live in Australia, you'll have heard our reputation for having the most number of animals that can kill you. And it's not limited, obviously, to the land. We have something in Australia called stonefish, and they're really nasty critters. And I was under the illusion, well, more importantly, just I didn't have the information I thought that stonefish were isolated to salt water. But apparently, according to Mr. Google, stonefish can be found in fresh water. So after that, I was treading very, very carefully and aiming for these spots of accumulated sand rather than the big rocky areas, because apparently that's where the stonefish likes to live rather than in the open stream section. It did dampen my experience a little bit, but luckily I'd had a fearless couple of days beforehand, and that's a good indicator of how I feel about a lot of knowledge that I acquire in my life. I go from a position of misinformation or simply not knowing to then knowing and then understanding, and sometimes that can be a very challenging and difficult road. And so for the podcast, I have agonized over what to talk about. And also, because I've worked in marketing for 20 years, I know what works and what doesn't work. And let me tell you, a conversation between two guys statistically is far more successful as a podcast medium than a single female speaking by herself. And that's why it was always my desire to do it with Paul. But Paul and I could not sort our shit out. And I think that's the case with a lot of people that are attempting to have meaningful relationships with other humans. There's some pretty significant issues that we're facing. And so that's what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about what other people aren't talking about, which is the personal stuff, the relationship stuff, the bits that are working and the bits that are highly dysfunctional and toxic. Toxic, of course, being the word of the year, but not for reasons that I would have liked. So that's my offer. My offer is to assist anyone who might have a question about a relationship with a significant other. And given that most of my significant relationships have broken down, I'm not claiming to know what works, but I can identify the parts in my life that have resulted in the breakdown of relationships with significant people in my life.
But let's get back to the camping. I would pride myself on my ability to make a fire, but let's be honest, you can tell that that fire was built by a chick. I will admit to having bits of wood fall out of the fire that were on fire because of my inability to break the sticks into small enough pieces to put into the fire. Look, I don't make claim to have all of this sorted because I don't. But I do the best that I can. And I think that's all we can do, right? So on this night, there was a pretty bad storm. And I've never ever heard anything like it. An interesting experience. So we'll see. We'll see if you want to listen to it for a bit.
And just as quickly as the storm came, it then passed. And, you know, I've said on social media a couple of times, my life is like the weather, and it changes just as frequently as I imagine most people's does. Life doesn't usually go according to plan. And Jordan Peterson's got some interesting things to say about that. But I don't quite feel confident enough in his perspective to be able to steelman him sufficiently. And so, you know, I spend these moments staring into the fire and contemplating my existence and everyone's existence and the meaning of the universe and all those cliche big questions. And that's what I enjoy doing. I didn't realize that that's what it would be, that I really enjoy thinking about these things. And so I have to now take you to a very special place that I found. For those of you who have been following me on social media for a number of years, you probably will have guessed by now that my website and social media is all set up because I understand marketing. I'm far more comfortable without makeup on, barefoot, and sitting in the dirt, if I'm honest. That's when I can think. And so as our chat together comes to a close and my time in the great outdoors comes to an end, all that we're left with is where to from here. And I posted on Facebook of my plans for the podcast and this premise of, you know, talking about relationships and that sort of thing, and how I was happy to answer questions, and already I have two. So I'm very happy about that, and now I'll get about answering them and then posting my response, and let's see how it goes. I'm excited about it, and I hope that you are too. There won't be any more really, well, there might be a bit more of this sort of very poor camera work. It's not my speciality at all. But I like the idea of it because I get to see so many beautiful places that are worth sharing, I think. Anyway, let's see how we go. And we'll chat soon.